Welcome to Alaska Weather, a production of Alaska Public Media and the National Weather Service, Alaska Region. Produced and broadcast daily from the studios of KAKM, Alaska Weather provides complete forecasts, public, marine, and aviation for all of Alaska. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for Sunday's show. Taking a look at the satellite advisories here. We've got freezing rain advisories out for the central western Tanana Valley. Tanana carrying freezing rain throughout the afternoon. Some light snow over at Fairbanks, but areas of freezing rain possible for this area through about 3 a.m. tomorrow morning. And then that should end or just switch over to snow, but amount should be pretty light. And then these other areas, freezing rain advisories also for Bristol Bay and the Yukon Delta. Some more moisture will spread some threats of freezing rain in there over later this evening, continuing in until about noon tomorrow. And then we have the dense fog advisories currently out for areas of fog with visibilities less than a quarter mile or down to a quarter mile or less here. Western Kenai Peninsula, Kenai up into the Anchorage area, Palmer, the Matanuska Valley, Susitna Valley, Wasilla, visibilities down around a half to a quarter mile, as well as to Talkeetna. And also the Copper River Basin, Gulkana, carrying a half a mile this afternoon at 4 o'clock. And so they're under that dense fog advisory for some areas of the zone, not the whole thing. Of course, higher elevations are up and out of it. For the satellite imagery, today you can see high pressure, not quite so far inland as it was yesterday. It's beginning to retreat back to the south there. We have a front swinging northward here on the western side of that ridge, bringing rain and still some gusty winds, but nothing all that strong to the Alaska Peninsula. Gusts up to about 40 miles an hour at times, isolated gusts of 40 miles an hour from eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, of course Cape Newnham, one of the windier areas. Still pretty breezy today out of the southeast, and something of a boundary here through the central interior, frontal boundary with moisture, areas of light snow or freezing rain or fog all the way back into the Yukon Delta coast, the St. Lawrence Island, dry for the most part across the Seward Peninsula. And then we had one storm exiting right here early today, the eastern Arctic coast pushing off quite rapidly into the Mackenzie River Delta, and another one coming in right behind it. So the west winds gusting to 50 miles an hour this morning died off this afternoon, and about 3 or 4 o'clock just became light and variable there on the east side. And seeing more snow come into the west here. Winds picking back up now on the western Arctic coast, Point Lay back down to Cape Lisburne, seeing gusts in the 30 to 40 mile an hour range once again. Lighter winds, that front is trailing back into the northwest interior here, the Chukchi Sea areas. Just some light snow there and lighter winds, a little bit of a breeze, but nothing too serious. A lot of moisture here over the northern Bering Sea, and you can see some breaks out here behind the main front, which appears to be near the Pribilofs, and then back to the north as well as to the west, and then another front yet coming into the Shimmy area, a little bit of rain out in that zone. Again, you can see flow here from southeast to northwest, and then it shears apart, this branch cutting inland with the main jet up here across the Brooks Range area with all the action up along the Arctic coast there. Just kind of a cloudy, light wind day for the most part here for the Aleutians, and then the winds again pick up here, and this other surge will sweep in, probably mostly clipping the western Bristol Bay zone with that chance of freezing rain, and then keeping that going this evening. A lot of clouds here over the Panhandle this afternoon of the stratocumulus variety, and also some areas of light snow. Juneau carrying some light snow this afternoon, as was Ketchikan, and drizzle and fog out along the coast. Sitka caught some of that, as well as Port Alexander. And then other areas saw some clearing. Petersburg, 27 degrees. On the chart today, high pressure right over south central Alaska. That's the reason for the light wind conditions and the warm air aloft associated with the upper level ridge. frontal boundary right through the interior here with some areas of light snow, light freezing rain or fog. More of a mixed condition here over the southwest, and then it's just liquid out along and off the coast into the Pribilofs there. Southeast winds, milder air mass over the southeast Bering Sea. We've got a series of storms that have been rolling eastward there across the Arctic coast and North Slope. And this is the 9 a.m. observation. You can see just the back edge of that gradient still hanging on to the eastern Arctic coast at 9 a.m. this morning, but everything's moving quite rapidly off to the east. In fact, looks like this warm front's already passed by the eastern Arctic coastal area, still just to the west of Kaktovik. So more snow coming in, and those winds will pick up once again. No change here over southern Alaska, with dense fog at times continuing through tonight into tomorrow morning and possibly right into tomorrow evening. So Monday through at least Monday night, doesn't look like there's going to be much change at all down in this area. Low clouds, areas of fog, flurries over the panhandle along with some drizzle. For tonight, this low sort of, actually a new one regenerates. The old one weakens, moves up to about that position. Remnant moisture here along the North Gulf Coast, again bringing those freezing rain threats into the areas. Another one develops and starts to push rain and wind back up toward the peninsula and the eastern Aleutians late tonight, but probably won't arrive there until Monday morning. A couple of weak lows in through here, and something of an Arctic boundary now starting to develop through the central interior with a little bit cooler air to the north. This next low dropping southeastward, again bringing some snow and fog, heaviest amounts over the western Arctic coast, right down to the Brooks Range and areas off to the east, although it will be lighter. Could see some light snow over the eastern interior areas and then back along that Arctic boundary that's developing over the interior, but no change. Dense fog continuing tonight, a little bit of moisture around Kodiak. Same thing over the southeast coast, no change from today with the low clouds and fog most extensive along and off the coast. For tomorrow, areas of light snow, again, possible anywhere along this frontal system through the central interior, but that'll be light. Now this low tracking southeastward, so it looks pretty snowy from the Brooks Range northward to the Arctic coast. Look for those east winds again. Winds will become east once again and pick up to about 15 to 25 miles per hour. Some of that snow probably will get cut off right at the Brooks Range there, so it could be a little bit of clearing here to the south, and then possible clearing optimistically here over the Bristol Bay area, with that moisture now shifting out over the Pribilof Islands, and then rain and wind back into the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians again with this frontal system. Main push of that up to the northwest once again, but then eventually it looks like it'll all start to slide off to the east and southeast. A little more in the way of clouds, and probably a little more extensive areas of light rain or drizzle or fog with some possible IFR right out along the coastline tomorrow. Even some areas over the inside waters will see some restricted ceilings and visibilities as well. And then this front edging its way eastward, but not all that fast, and just about nothing significant in the way of wind associated with it, just some rain and snow trying to push eastward. Pushes a little eastward, which will bring some moisture into the Adak and Atka area on Tuesday. Arctic front now, upper level low dropping into the northeast interior. Big Arctic high coming south from the Arctic there, still off the coast though, but almost 1,050 millibars. And that upper low is going to, with the northeast wind flow at the surface, pretty good chance of some decent snow over the, at least from the central Tanana Valley back to the border, and then that'll work right down to the Alaska Range and then slide down the western side into the Kuskokwim Valley, but again, mostly right up toward the Alaska Range there. Not much should get into the Susitna Valley at all, but what this increasing northeast gradient will do with the lower pressures down over Kodiak Island should start to decrease the areas of low clouds and fog we've seen from Prince William Sound, Kenai Peninsula areas, and of course Cook Inlet and the Susitna Valley over toward Palmer. So look for improvement, could start late tomorrow night and gradually continue through the day on Tuesday. And now we've got rain, southerly flow pushing moisture up across the southern southeast coast. Should stay dry in the north there, with most of this moisture staying up in Canada. Temperatures this afternoon contrasted from 39 with some light drizzle and fog at Sitka to 27 over at Petersburg, 25 up at Skagway, 32 Yakutat, upper teens and 20s for the Prince William Sound areas, but Seward pushed up to 33, 26 in Palmer with a half mile in fog, 30 degrees in Kenai, about the same visibility there with fog, 32 up at Talkeetna. They had a quarter mile in fog with 21 at Denali, 31 at Fairbanks, some flurries there, 33 at Minchumina. Mostly in the 20s over the Yukon Flats from Eagle back in toward the Koyukuk Valley. Brooks Range in the mid to upper teens, and Arctic Coast kind of a range from 12 at Kaktovik to 24 at New Ixit, 28 degrees over at Point Lay, 32 at Point Hope, mid to upper 20s over the northwest part of the state, and 17 at Nome to 34 at Unalakleet, otherwise in the 30s out here over the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta areas with a 28, and some fog around Russian Mission. Out in the Bering Sea, upper 30s to lower 40s in that area. The warm spot was 46 in Unalaska today at 4 p.m. Otherwise, the Alaska Peninsula in the mid-40s. Lows tonight dropping back below zero up here over the northeast interior, but milder back to the west and a lot milder off to the southwest. Mostly in the 20 to 35 degree range over the Panhandle, depending on where the clearing is. And again, that same sort of pattern here over the Kuskokwim Valley. Highs tomorrow staying below zero, places like Arctic Village, so a little cooler up here, and that cooling trend will probably continue into the middle, if not the latter part of the week, eventually finding its way down into southern Alaska toward the weekend, but back into the 40s there for the Alaska Peninsula. Flying weather, a swath of VFR here through the interior, but again, a lot of low clouds and fog keeping Cook Inlet and the valleys in the IFR range. And some of that into the North Gulf Coast and Prince William Sound. IFR there with snow, blowing snow developing along the Arctic coast, North Slope right into the Brooks Range. And that'll extend southeastward, at least down to the White Mountains, possibly into the Tanana Valley, and just a chance some of that could slip on down into the north slopes of the central and eastern Alaska Range. Generally VFR over the Panhandle, but some areas of marginal conditions, and IFR St. Lawrence Island down along the coast there, with areas of IFR lurking around anywhere in the Bering Sea here. Could be pretty good though for Adak and Atka. For Anatuvik, occasionally IFR tomorrow, especially on the north side. Adigan, go for marginal VFR, possible IFR in that northern entrance. Lake Clark and Merrill, both sides and through the pass, VFR, same forecast for windy and rainy. Watch for some marginal stuff possibly showing up on the north entrance for windy, but it'll probably stay VFR. Isabel, VFR. Mentasta, another VFR day, and Tanita looking good as well. Portage, about like today, IFR possibly becoming marginal. For Chilkoot and White, VFR for those two passes continuing. Freezing levels now showing things beginning to recede southward a little bit here. 2,000 feet still up along the coast tomorrow afternoon up into almost all the way up to Nome there. A little bit milder here over the Bering Sea, and then the surface hugging the coastline just inland there near the border down the Panhandle. Looking at icing threats, possibly some here over the North Slope and Arctic coast, mostly below 12,000 feet with that continued feed of southeasterly wind flow and moisture coming into the peninsula and the eastern Aleutians. Winds aloft for tomorrow. This ridge again slowly fading off to the southeast. Watch this upper low come down, having a little more kick than it looked like it had yesterday, so that should bring cold, snowy conditions in across all of the Tanana Valley right down to the Alaska Range. By Tuesday, weak upper trough here will mostly now slide off to the southeast. For the 3,000 or 9,000 foot winds, westerlies 10 to 20 in the interior, becoming back around to the east along the Arctic coast with those strongest winds remaining off the coast. Southeast 45 for the Alaska Peninsula, 3,000 foot winds up to 40 knots at this level. Otherwise pretty light here over southern Alaska, light along the Brooks Range up to 25 along the Arctic coast. Turbulence, maybe some moderate chop up there, light to isolated moderate from the Brooks Range back to the Chukchi Sea through the Bering Strait, and then moderate chop with those southeast winds and that next system rolling up into the Alaska Peninsula. And after the break, I'll be back with a look at the marine forecasts.
Tucked away near Soldovia, Alaska, along beautiful Kachemak Bay, is the Kositsna Bay Laboratory, which is operated in partnership by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the University of Alaska Fairbanks. This unique marine research and teaching laboratory is dedicated to excellence in marine science and provides a place where people can learn more about marine and coastal ecosystems. Here today to talk about the laboratory are its directors Chris Holderried and David Christie. Why is the location of the laboratory so important?
Jim, Kachemak Bay is a microcosm in many ways of southern Alaskan coastline. It has rocky coastlines, it has glaciers feeding into it, it has eelgrass beds at the head of the bay, and on the north side it has cliffs that are eroding into the bay. So we can, within just a few miles of the lab, we can access all these different types of ecosystems that live with these different environments.
So you have basically a small little world encapsulated in Kachemak Bay.
Provides
Yes,
a natural laboratory.
Yeah. Well, how long has the lab been around?
The lab's actually been around for as long as Alaska's been a state. It
Wow.
was originally constructed in 1959. There was a recognition back then that some of the same problems we face today with sustainable use of coastal resources, there were some challenges then, particularly in the herring fishery, and they saw the need for more science to understand those changes.
So who oversees the laboratory?
Well, the lab is actually run by NOAA through the National Ocean Service, and in the National Ocean Service it's part of our Coastal Ocean Science program. And then we're run in partnership with the University of Alaska Fairbanks. But one of the interesting things is we actually fall under what is called the Center for Coastal Fisheries and Habitat Research, which is another facility located in Beaufort, North Carolina. Some people say, how do you have this connection between coastal Alaska and coastal North Carolina? But if you look at the issues in both places between fishing and ecotourism and sustainable resources, and they are very, very similar. It's a pretty easy connection to make. There is one of our unique features in the lab is that there is a whole range of folks that get to use the laboratory, both from the research side and from supporting our education missions. On the research side, there's NOAA, researchers from NOAA offices, from other federal agencies, from state agencies, and as well as university scientists. And from an education group, we've got college students, both undergraduate and graduate, and school children that come for field science camps.
That's outstanding. Well, describe some of the research that's being done at the laboratory.
Well, one of our main focus areas of research at the lab is how do we provide the science to sustain coastal resources. Obviously, use of coastal resources is very important in Alaska, and so how can we support that with good science? Some examples are understanding the underwater habitats and how fish and other species are using those habitats, and supporting uses like local mariculture that the oyster farmers are doing.
A lot of the research at the lab focuses around questions about how ecosystems work. How will they change in the future as temperatures potentially change? How will they change with changing amounts of sediment coming into the bay as the glaciers retreat? And in general, why are things where they are and how are they changing through time? And the particular areas that have been focused on recently in the lab are in the kelp forests, which are extensive in the bay, and of course they provide very good habitat for young fish and other animals, other organisms. And then the extensive intertidal zones. We have a 28-foot tidal range in the bay, which means between high and low tide, there are very large areas in which a wide variety of marine organisms live. As we move into the future, we'll be increasingly adding components of instrumentation to the lab, so developing and experimenting with new ways of observing and measuring what's going on underwater when people can't be there.
So what classes are being taught at the lab?
There's quite a range of classes, and it changes every year. The big constant for the last 10 years has been the dive classes. We've trained well over 100 divers in that time. Last year there were 600 scuba dives conducted out of the lab. We have a range of classes taking advantage of the access to the ecosystems of the bay, classes on vertebrates, classes on invertebrates. We've had a climate change class there last summer, and a variety of things coming up. Some of the classes are taught by UAF professors, some are taught by our partners at University of Alaska Anchorage, and particularly the local Kenai Peninsula Community College in Homer, and also from Alaska Pacific University.
Partnerships. Can you touch on that, Chris? What partnerships have you forged to further the mission of the laboratory?
Yeah, central to how the laboratory operates is that we do most everything we do in partnership with other organizations. We're fairly limited in our federal staff. Right now we just have 2. And so to accomplish all the science missions and the education missions that NOAA wants in this area, we work obviously with the University of Alaska Fairbanks, other universities to do the education mission, as well as local marine education groups like the Center for Alaskan Coastal Studies and Homer. From a research perspective, we do a lot of work with other NOAA offices, so researchers from other NOAA offices, from in the state with the Kachemak Bay National Estuarine Research Reserve, which covers most of Kachemak Bay, and with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game. That's one of our big partners. And then nationally, we're working with other NOAA offices like the Office of Coast Survey, National Geodetic Survey, and other partners in our coastal ocean science programs.
How do you get the community involved?
Well, that's one of the really fun parts about where the laboratory is and who we get to work with. We do everything from, we have open houses for the general public. We make presentations out in the community. We also get scientists who come into the lab to do research to do presentations on their work, so they get wider exposure to that. We also have a lot of classes that are available for community members to take, as well as doing teacher training workshops and classes that teachers in the local schools, including local villages, can take. And then we do a fair amount of work with the local tribes from Seldovia, Port Graham, and Nenwalek. That's been primarily focused on education programs for the kids.
So what is your vision of the lab?
Jim, we're looking to continue to build the lab in partnership with all the people we work with around the Bay and elsewhere in Alaska, to become the place where people choose to come when they have questions, so they want to investigate new ways of looking at coastal ecosystems all around southern Alaska. We want the lab in particular to be a place where we can deploy and test new technologies to see how they work in Alaskan conditions before we take them out into the rest of Alaska. And working from there, we're trying to get smarter about how we investigate coastal Alaska, because as you know, there are lots of places where you can't get to very easily, where there are no people. So we need to work out ways of developing instruments that we can put out there when there are no people around. We need to have ways to use the communities, to work with communities, to collect data that are of interest to them, but also that can be fed back to the lab and back to the world in general through the internet.
From a broad perspective, NOAA has an increasing focus on helping communities adapt to climate change. And so the lab is one of the places where we do the science to understand how these systems are changing, how they're changing now in response to climate change, in response to human activities and coastal development, things like that, and then how we can help communities to adapt to those changes in the future.
And thank you for joining us here on Alaska Weather Facts. Until next time.
West winds, light west winds out here along the coast, south to southwest, on the light side over the inside waters. And then things should start to pick up here down over the southern coast, up to 25 knots or 20 to 25 knots there, staying light up to the north, light over the inside waters, although we'll see things start to pick up a little bit over the southern portion. And for south central Alaska, Cook Inlet, Kodiak Island, light variable winds in the 5 to 10, maybe 15 knot range. I think the winds here in the Gulf of Alaska, like Middleton Island, will be a little lighter than what you saw today, which were in that 15 to 20 knot range. Should come down to about 10. All variable directions. Becoming easterly here on the south coast there at Kodiak Island, which could increase from the northeast. Could see some gales down there towards Sitkinak, and small craft advisories here up the coastline. 20 to 25 knots coming up for Shelikof Strait on Tuesday. Northeast winds at about 20, all the way up from the Barren Islands into Cook Inlet, and same thing, 20 knot winds here for Prince William Sound, and east northeasterlies for the North Gulf Coast. Bristol Bay east 20 tomorrow, small craft advisories for the peninsula for those easterlies at 25 knots, and then small craft advisories here from Sitkinak all the way to Cape Sarachev, 20-knot winds, all from the northeast into Bristol Bay. And for the Aleutian, small crafts out here in the west, south 20 for the central areas, 15 to 25 knots here for the eastern areas of the strongest winds over the Fox Islands. And staying northeast there for the Dutch Harbor and Alaska areas, as well as Nikolsky, and then pretty light winds here, Adak and Atka on Tuesday, 10 to 15 knots, up to 25 out for that far western zone. And the southwest coast, 15, more of an easterly wind at 20 knots there, right across the northern Bering Sea, and northeast 25, picking up there for the St. Lawrence Island area. And now northeast winds right down into the St. Matthew Island area, and actually even to the Pribilofs there, so that's going to bring eventually some colder air down into the area, 15 to 20 knots from the northeast out along the coast. And for the Arctic coast, winds east at 25, northeast 20 knots there for the central areas, and 15 for the west side, and then back up to 25 for this marine area right there, and then back down to 20 knots for the Chukchi Sea. And then on Sunday, swinging those directions around once again, coming back up to 30 to 35 knots. I'll skip that and go to tonight. And chance of freezing rain here until 9 p.m. through the interior valleys, or I'm sorry, until tomorrow morning, or 3 a.m. for the interior valleys, Tanana Valley, areas of freezing rain possible. Freezing rain advisories out also for Bristol Bay and the Kuskokwim Delta. Otherwise, dense fog advisories in the areas that were foggy all day today, staying that way tonight. And then more wind and rain here coming up into the Aleutians tomorrow. Upper level low along with a surface low, tracking some snow in across the North Slope areas right down to the Brooks Range, and then another band of snow along this developing Arctic boundary in the interior, which will begin to take a push to the south as that upper low and so a strong surface high builds into the north with snow and blowing snow through the mountain passes. Have a good evening.
These forecasts are to be used for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating. Alaska Weather is made possible by the following sponsors.
The National Weather Service.